What does it mean to live with honor? Today we live in a society that places little emphasis on this type of conduct as a whole. Our primary social system revolves around the exchange of money. You may experience random acts of kindness or good deeds from friends, family, neighbors, but there is no distinct group of people in our culture who are expected to consistently live honorably. This wasn't always the case, and in this episode we will take you back in time to an age where honor reigned supreme. Knights, warriors, Bushido, chivalry, and the controversial ancient Japanese rite of ritual suicide. You're watching Western Brahmin, and this is episode 5. There are two fundamental types of male archetypes: the philosopher or priest, and the warrior or hero. A knight would have represented the physical and heroic action, whereas the priest would have been a symbol of the intellect. The king would be expected to embody both characteristics, making him both noble in his action and wise in his thoughts. In this video, we will be discussing the warrior, the characteristics they displayed in their spiritual path to greatness. Throughout history, cultures have created imagery either through myth and legend or written code of the ideal warrior. These warriors, myths, and stories make up the corpus of hero mythology. Many of the greatest movies ever made revolve around this concept of the hero. Movies like The Lord of the Rings and Gladiator are prime examples of this. The book A Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell sheds light on this concept. In the book, Campbell explains 17 stages found in nearly all the world's myths that a hero goes through in attaining knowledge of the greater good and how to become a better human or member of society. These motifs resonate with us because they speak to a fundamental truth about humanity. We admire a hero. Understanding the idea of the hero and his place in society is crucial to understanding religion and humanity itself. Why is it built into our very nature to admire someone who is heroic? The reason is that for thousands of years, humans lived in a harsh and dangerous world filled with all kinds of unknowns. In this world of uncertainty, an individual would rise to the task of protecting the tribe from danger. He would have been physically and mentally fortified to stand up in the face of danger. From this concept of aspiring toward the higher good, a hierarchy emerged. Individuals who displayed desirable characteristics of a society based around this concept would rise to the top of society as leaders. Over time, these became clear distinctions in society, with a class hierarchy based around merit being fundamental to the existence of a people. This hierarchical system is part of not only human nature, but nature as a whole. As demonstrated by the work of Jane Goodall, chimps have a similar hierarchy where an alpha chimp will rise to the top and be held to certain rules by the troop. If the alpha chimp becomes too tyrannical, he will be overtaken by two lesser chimps, and you see similar functions all throughout nature. Nature would also have selected for these early alpha proto-kings to produce more offspring, as they would have been the most desirable mates in a tribe. As you can see, even still today, women are attracted to men of physical prowess or high status. Although many who display the imagery of this archetype, such as famous musicians or actors, are not actually noble in action like our ancestors were. The artificial display of status still speaks to the primal nature of women, What this says is that we as humans will always flock to a noble leader within the tribe who will guide us and protect us against the dangers of the outside world. In nearly every ancient tale of great heroes, there is something the hero must conquer. Some of the more famous myths being St. George conquering the dragon, Thor slaying the world's serpent Jormungandr, or Indra defeating Vritra. This motif appears in nearly every culture on Earth, and in many cases involves a god who represents heroic action, slaying the serpent or serpent-like figure. Every aspect of these stories has representational forms both internally and externally that speak to us and show us the true nature of humans and our intimate connection with nature. The serpent, one of our ancient primordial foes, with his belly always on the earth and a bite that could bring death, forever condemned to a worldly or earthly existence, represents the bad decisions we make in our lives. Those decisions that push us towards negativity and desire. It is no coincidence that our ancestral heroes were warriors who defeated the serpent of the lower self. Early medieval Viking warriors wore the Thor hammer pendant as a sign that they were in fact members of the warrior elite. Those men who had conquered their inner serpent, who were noble in their actions and fit to protect the tribe. This idea of the warrior hero, we know, goes at least as far back as the Proto-Indo-European culture of the Pontic-Caspian steppe. If we look at Indo-European traditions, a basic dualistic framework exists that is representative of both human nature and our entangled relationship to nature itself. At some point, humans became aware of their own existence, and with that awareness, this duality emerged. This is what the Christians describe as the fall of man. In episode 3, I discussed the possibility that this mutation occurred as a result of Homo sapien and Neanderthal interbreeding. If you have spent much time in nature, you have witnessed the eternal balance and subsequent hierarchy that exists in all living things. Humans are no exception to this rule. It is the force of destruction and creation, the balance of the yin and yang, action and non-action, chaos and order, us and them, the self and other. Our ability to distinguish between these two is what makes us human and is the driving force behind all of our actions. Our ancestors explained this duality better than we can today. Our modern scientific and psychological definitions that attempt to describe this duality simply fall short. Our ancestors viewed these forces as part of nature, and in doing so, deified them by making them into gods that were both bound to the earth and to the psyche. Modern people scoff at the idea that the Sky Father and the Earth Mother are real forces, but if we set aside our materialistic tendencies, we can see that this is in fact a more natural and even superior way of understanding the concept, as it presents the human experience as being interdependent upon our natural surrounding and not severed from it. The reconstructed Indo-European name for the Mother Earth goddess is Degom, which would represent chaos, destruction, rebirth, desire, and death. Deus Pater, or Sky Father, would represent the higher nature, the ineffable, creation, order, and the intellect. Within that circle of chaos and order lies the hero archetype. A warrior would understand the balance of nature between the Sky Father and Earth Mother, but would aspire to be like Thor or Indra, the fully actualized hero that overcomes their primal urges and displays a sense of honor. Society would expect them to live up to these standards, lest they be shunned or exiled. To the ancient Indo-European people, these would not simply be archetypes, they would be woven into the fabric of society. These forces would be very real. Perkunos, the Proto-Indo-European reconstruction of Thor, Indra, Zeus, and Perun, may or may not have been a real person, but was more likely an amalgamation of all of the great warriors that had come before and would have been perceived as a real being. We are so inundated with distractions and distortions in modern times that we struggle to understand this concept of a God that is both physical and metaphysical simultaneously. Warriors would have arisen naturally in early human societies in men who displayed aspects of strength and virtue, but over time a warrior class would begin to emerge with subsequent guilds and rituals to honor the importance of our great defenders of society. Rigorous training from boyhood into adulthood, mind-calming exercises, prayer or meditation, and even entire religions centered around cultivating the warrior mind and body. In fact, Buddhism, though we think of it as a religion of peace today in the West, was a religion created around the warrior ethos. The Buddha himself was born into the Kshatriya Varna, or warrior class. Buddhism was also later used in feudal Japan to train samurai warriors. The warrior code in its earliest form would have likely been a song or chant that was recited by warriors to ingrain the ideas into their minds or how they should behave. The warrior code can be seen as existing synonymously with the religious beliefs of the culture. In many cases, this code of honor seems to hold the warrior to a higher ethical standard than that required for an ordinary citizen within the general population of the society that the warrior served. The code is not imposed from the outside. The warrior themselves police strict adherence to these standards, with violators being shamed, ostracized, and even killed by their peers for breaking the code. The reputation of the warrior being of the utmost importance was what gave him the opportunity to rise to legendary fame. With this reputation on the line, a knight, a samurai, or warrior would also be kind and respectful to normal members of society. Consequently, if a warrior gave charity to his community, it would positively affect his reputation. This quest for glory, fame, and honor would later be written down in both medieval Europe and feudal Japan as a code of chivalry and Bushido, respectively. Chivalry was a code of conduct that was officially developed in the 12th century in feudal Europe and revolved around the institution of knighthood, but the basic concepts, as previously described, go back at least into the Bronze Age. Knights in the warrior caste of antiquity lived by a strict code of honor. The following is taken from an 11th century manuscript called the Song of Roland. Roland was a loyal defender of the king, and his code of conduct is a description of the meaning of chivalry. To fear God and maintain his church, to serve the liege lord in valor and faith, to protect the weak and the meek, to give aid to widows and orphans, to refrain from the merciless offenses, to live by honor and for glory, to despise monetary reward, to fight for the welfare of all, to obey those placed in authority, to guard the honor of fellow knights, to avoid unfairness, meanness, and deceit, to keep faith, at all times to speak the truth, to persevere to the end in any enterprise begun, to respect the honor of women, never to refuse a challenge from an equal, never to turn the back upon a foe. These vows were not taken lightly either by feudal European society or by the knight himself. Knights were warriors at heart and heroes to the society they served. The cliché of the knight in shining armor rescuing the damsel in distress, though it may be embellished at times, may have had a degree of truth to it, and would have made the knights of the Middle Ages out to be the superstars of their day. For the knight who had proven himself to be a man of honor serving his people, it was a title he deserved. One of the events that many knights looked forward to was the tournament. Kings or lords would hold a competition determining the greatest warrior in the land. This was not only a test of strength, it was a test of will and honor. In the early Middle Ages, tournaments were similar to small, regulated war, where anywhere from 4 knights up to 100 would engage in battle, sometimes even to the death. If a warrior lost and yelled peace, his opponent would spare his life and be given the right to hold him hostage, forcing his family to buy him back. This seems like a foolish thing to do, and many knights' ladies likely thought so as well. But there may have been an evolutionary and societal benefit to this kind of behavior. The act of single combat, which would be a duel between 2 knights to settle a dispute or challenge, along with the perpetuation of a tournament, would be likely selected for the most fit and most skilled knights to pass on their offspring. We most certainly owe our strength and resilience to the competitive brawling of our warrior ancestors. Without them passing on their warrior genes and noble practices, Europe would have likely been long since conquered. Nature prefers strength. The tournament was our ancestors' hardcore version of the training gym. As the tournament eventually faded from the gruesome battles of old to the more PC version of the joust, and then eventually on to the modern sport of American football, which is entirely lacking in nobility, the spirit of the knight and the ancient noble warriors that came before him faded into obscurity. It is likely that by the time cannons and firearms replaced the knight in the 16th century, the institution of knighthood was already in decline. Christianity had long since converted most of the pagans of Europe, who often longed for war, praising single combat, the tournament, and the warrior ethos. A new wave of ideas was sweeping across Europe, a movement driven by science and progress, further perpetuated by the advent of the printing press and a group of reformers called Protestants. This new technological wave was called the Industrial Revolution, and its consequences would be a disaster for the warrior class. Though the warrior class had all but vanished by the 18th century in Europe, replaced by the newly rising merchant class who were reaping the capital rewards of the quickly emerging industrial society that had taken hold in Europe, there was still at least one society left where the warrior spirit still held sway. Nearly half a globe away, feudalism was alive and well in Japan. The Japanese equivalent to the knight was the samurai. Japanese samurai warriors are popular still to this day for their exceptional mental fortitude and skill in martial arts. The samurai upheld an unbreakable loyalty to the aristocratic feudal lords known as the daimyo. By this period, Japan had undergone centuries of clan conflicts and power shifts among noble families, but was experiencing a period of peace and growth under the extremely nationalist and isolationist rule of the Tokugawa clan during the Edo period. The samurai practiced a warrior code not unlike chivalry known as Bushido. The samurai were known for their radical selflessness, sincerity, frugality, loyalty, martial arts mastery, and honor until death. In 1896, author Arthur May Knapp wrote the following: "The samurai of 30 years ago had behind him 1,000 years of training in the law of honor, obedience, duty, and self-sacrifice. It was not needed to create or establish them, As a child, he had but to be instructed, as indeed he was from his earliest years, in the etiquette of self-immolation. Self-immolation was a form of ritualistic suicide known in Japan as seppuku. The samurai saw themselves as being so dedicated to their lord, their family, and to the Bushido code that were one to break the code, dishonor their lord, or disgrace their family, it was their duty to commit seppuku. Though there are many historical inaccuracies, I recommend watching the movie The Last Samurai to better understand the samurai ethos and the unbelievable loyalty that they displayed. One of the most fascinating stories of seppuku and the revival of the Bushido code is the Japanese author and actor Yukio Mishima. On November 25, 1970, Yukio Mishima and 4 others, all being members of the Taten no Kai, a secret group geared toward restoring the Bushido code, entered the Eastern Command of the Japanese Self-Defense Forces building in an attempt to either perform a successful coup or, at the very least, to make a statement showing how dedicated they were to the idea of restoring national pride and the warrior ethics back into Japanese culture. When the coup attempt failed, Mishima, in arguably one of the boldest acts in the 20th century, committed seppuku, making a statement to Japanese society and to the world as a whole that there were still men who believed in the warrior code and the idea of dying for a cause greater than oneself. The death of Yukio Mishima remains a controversial topic in modern society, but the growing popularity of some of Mishima's works, such as Sun and Steel, are a sign that people do still feel a connection to this way of life. One of the essential factors in living a good life is finding a purpose. Knights, samurai, and the warriors throughout time had a purpose. That purpose was built into their society. They weren't faced with the question of what do I do to give my life purpose. Some people find hobbies, some find sports, but for others, this is just not enough. The ragged genetic remains and legends of the ancient heroes and warriors lives on in some who are alive today. For many of these restless folk who have spent their lives learning the ancient traditions, a world without gods or heroes seems like an empty void and ultimately a society with no meaning or purpose. So what is there to do? Is there a future for the individuals who are noble in spirit and in action? Or is the warrior spirit a thing of the past that modern society has no place for? For me, the answer is simple. The hero is not only an idea. The hero is in fact built into both the human mind and the human body. It is a part of our genetics, a primordial power waiting to be harnessed. Every man has within him not only the desire, but the ability to become a modern-day warrior, a force for good and for change. I'm encouraging anyone who has watched this video to read about a warrior or hero from history that inspired you. Set a goal that you think will help you cultivate your warrior spirit and work to achieve it. If you are on Twitter, please feel free to reach out and let me know what hero inspired you and what you did to achieve your goal. Thank you for watching.